And now let's take the auxiliary functions. Yes, functions, plural. I completely depart from any system that labels a specific function as the auxiliary of the cognitive stack, especially if that function is only one orientation. So is my extroverted feeling, as an INFJ, my auxiliary function? Yes, but it isn't auxiliary to my introverted intuition, it's auxiliary to my extroverted sensing. It's a divergent function, it instills consequence. It compels me to abide by social norms, and it is only when I'm employing it in a convergent manner that it becomes a convergent auxiliary, but it is when I'm employing it in a convergent manner that I'm also employing extroverted sensing a lot of the time in a convergent manner. And thus it is the convergent auxiliary to my extroverted sensing when I rotate on my axis. So I don't fully understand where the auxiliary function of MBTI came from, but I know it wasn't from Jung. I don't fully understand where the tertiary thing came from either. Maybe it's because in a lot of people this function's fairly unactivated and therefore it kind of comes third maybe in a person's development, and I sort of see the logic there. But within CPT, this tertiary function is the convergent auxiliary. It is auxiliary to the dominant, whereas my extroverted feeling is auxiliary to my extroverted sensing and thus being a part of my divergent stack. My introverted thinking is auxiliary to my introverted intuition and thus a part of my convergent stack. I primarily take responsibility for my introverted intuition and my introverted thinking, therefore I form visions, I form big picture kaleidoscopes, and then contain that information within my own constructed frameworks, which I tend to be quite protective of. While we can definitely argue chicken or the egg analogies for as long as we want to, I'm going to say external information begins. So no matter whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, your process always begins with the perception of external information. Therefore, yes, my extroverted sensing and extroverted feeling are perceiving social information. So extroverted sensing details, concrete experiences gone through the filter of my extroverted feeling divergent auxiliary. And then this divergent information, as a function to perform an authoritative role within my stack, feed into my introverted intuition and introverted thinking frameworks and inform my ego complex's agenda. My agenda is to the concrete social experience. Therefore, I'm trying to make sense of humanity. I'm trying to make sense of the people in my life. I'm trying to envisage ideal social situations, ideal communal situations, situations in which I can impact people on a large scale and serve an important role within society. But all the creative work tends to be done by my internal structures, by my introverted intuition and introverted thinking. It is these two functions, serving as they do within the dominant stack, that seek to create new patterns. They seek to find new ways of doing things, and they are the creative functions, they are the convergent functions. Whereas my extroverted sensing and extroverted feeling, so my divergent lens and divergent codec, as a default state, these functions are more observational, but depending on the way I am engaging my oppositional function, as I was talking about previously, the state of these functions can change. They can become convergent or they can stay divergent. They can perform as an anchor into reality. They can inform the agenda of my dominant stack, etc. But here's where we get a little bit more complicated. Both codecs can be used by either lens. Yes, I'm saying that correctly. We can employ either codec that we like to. In order to do so, we need to let go of the codec to which we are primarily compelled towards, and that will naturally allow the other codec to rise to the surface of either consciousness or just simple magnitude. So again, I'll use myself as an example. The INFJ would not ordinarily be employing their introverted feeling alongside their introverted intuition. That would be the convergent stack of the INTJ. Instead, the INFJ would have their feeling function oriented externally and thus be rather oftentimes blind to what's going on within themselves. But this doesn't mean they cannot activate an introverted feeling. It just means they have to engage with introverted intuition and subsequently drop introverted thinking. And then the codec that becomes available is introverted feeling instead. Will it be relatively unconscious? Yes. But that doesn't stop the type from gazing predominantly into its limbic circuits rather than its cerebral circuits. Likewise, it is very possible for an INFJ to use extroverted thinking alongside extroverted sensing. In order to do that, the INFJ must engage with a situation in a concrete reality, employing the very detailed, very specific extroverted sensing scope, and then allow themselves to drop their extroverted feeling. The less people they're around, the easier it is to do so, but it is still possible, even when in a company of other people who you want to impress or abide by, to let go of extroverted feeling and allow extroverted thinking to rise naturally to the surface. And likewise, I can use extroverted thinking through extroverted intuition, which I do usually, and conversely use introverted feeling alongside introverted sensing. In fact, I do that more often than I do introverted intuition with my introverted feeling. But I must point out this is something of a minefield, and therefore I'm not going to fully explore this topic within the context of this video. And if I do explore this topic thoroughly, it would be in regards to specific types, specific examples, and then you can go through the type psyche and explore thoroughly the different manifestations dependent upon context, dependent upon the individual's social archetype, which is a completely separate entity to cognitive type, and focus specifically on that individual. Because like I said, it's too much of a minefield, too much of an asteroid field, if you like. There's too many variables in order to say across the board how every single type will be acting, because it depends on context, it depends on specific situations which you need to state in regards to a specific type.